Part 1, The Soldier Who Came Home. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Coleman drove slowly through the familiar streets of Oak Ridge, the town where he grew up. After 20 years in the United States Army, for deployments to combat zones, and countless medals, Marcus was finally home. He had just been appointed Deputy Director of Strategy at the Pentagon Special Operations Command, a prestigious position that his mother, Elaine, would have been proud of if she were still alive. His shiny black SUV rolled down the same streets that an 18-year-old black man had left 20 years earlier in search of a different future. Marcus had chosen the military not only out of patriotism but also because he wanted to escape the fate of many of his high school friends, harassment by the police, unjustified suspicion, and even arrest for petty crimes. "A lot has changed," he said to himself, looking at the new stores and renovated neighborhoods. Oak Ridge had changed, and so had Marcus. At 38, he was no longer the impetuous teenager he had once been. Now he was a high-ranking officer in the United States Army, a respected man with broad shoulders, a deep gaze, and a confident demeanor. He parked in front of his sister Tanya's house, the only member of the family still in Oak Ridge. The small house with its white picket fence and well-kept garden made Marcus smile. Tanya had always had a knack for creating a cozy atmosphere, no matter how difficult the circumstances. She had been a nurse for 20 years, raised 2 excellent children, and was always a rock when Marcus returned from distant missions. "Uncle Marcus!" A shout of joy rang out as his 16-year-old niece, Zoe, ran out the front door. "Uncle is here." Marcus grinned widely as he hugged his niece. "It's me, Zoe." "Oh, you're so tall." "My brother." Tanya appeared in the doorway, tears in her eyes as she walked toward Marcus. "Finally home." "Sister," Marcus replied, wrapping his arms around her. "It's good to be back." That evening was a cozy family meal. Tanya cooked her brother's favorites, ribs, mashed potatoes, and homemade apple pie for dessert. Marcus told them about his new job and his plans to buy a house nearby. He didn't want to miss another moment of the lives of Zoe and her brother, James Jr., who was a sophomore at Howard University. "Why don't you stay here tonight?" Tanya suggested. "James Jr.'s room is still intact." Marcus shook his head. "I know you. I've booked a room at the Marriott downtown. I need some space to think. But I'll be back tomorrow for lunch." Tanya hugged her brother again. "Be careful, Marcus. Oak Ridge isn't exactly what you remember." "You'll be fine, sis," he assured her. "You're not a kid anymore." As he drove toward the hotel, Marcus opened the window and breathed in the night air. He wondered about Tanya's warning. The truth was, despite his years and his professional success, he couldn't completely erase the memories of being unjustly targeted because of the color of his skin. It was one of the reasons he always wore his uniform in public, a symbolic armor that he hoped would overcome prejudice. But tonight, in jeans and a simple polo shirt, Marcus was just another black man driving in the dark. Red and blue lights flashed on the windshield as Marcus noticed a police cruiser following him. He reflexively checked the speedometer, 5 miles under the limit. He slowed at the next stop sign, counted to 3, then continued. The patrol car followed. "Not this again," he whispered, the familiar feeling of anxiety rising in his chest. Marcus knew the routine: stay calm, comply, no sudden movements. The red and blue lights of the police car flashed, and Marcus sighed, pulling the car over carefully. He rolled down the window, put his hands on the wheel where they were clearly visible, and waited. Part 2, Confrontation. The officer approached Marcus's car, his flashlight shining into the cockpit. Marcus stared straight ahead, trying not to let his anger rise. "Good evening, officer," he said slowly and clearly. "Paperwork," the officer ordered, without a salute. He was in his 30s, with short hair and a tense face. "May I know why I was stopped?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. "License and registration," the officer repeated, his hand on the butt of his gun. Marcus noticed the gesture. 20 years of military training and combat experience had made him acutely aware of the tension of the situation. Officer, I'll take my wallet from my pocket and my registration from the glove box. I'm letting you know before I move. The officer nodded. Marcus slowly reached into his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and military identification, then opened the glove box to retrieve the car registration. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Coleman of the United States Army, he said as he handed the papers to the officer. I've just been assigned to the Pentagon. The officer was unimpressed. He studied the identification and license, then shined his flashlight into the car. Have you had a drink tonight, Colonel? Marcus clenched his hands on the steering wheel. No, sir. I just left my sister's house and am on my way to a hotel. Luxury car for a family visit, the officer remarked. It's a Department of Defense official vehicle, Marcus replied, feeling his irritation rising. Get out of the car, the officer ordered suddenly. Officer, I don't understand. Get out of the car now, sir. Marcus knew that protesting would only make things worse. He slowly opened the car door and stepped out, standing tall at his impressive 6 feet 10 inches. Turn around, hands on the hood, the officer instructed. Officer, Marcus tried to keep his composure. What did I do wrong? I suspect you are driving under the influence. Follow my instructions. Marcus knew this was a lie. He hadn't had a drop of alcohol. It was a lame excuse to get him out of the car. But he also knew that in this situation, compliance was the safest thing to do. He slowly turned around and placed his hands on the hood. Officer, I haven't had a drink tonight. I'm a military officer on duty. You can call my commanding officer to verify. But the officer had already begun searching Marcus, searching his pockets. Do you have any weapons? No, Marcus replied, feeling humiliated at being searched in the middle of the street. Just then, a second patrol car pulled up, and an older officer stepped out. What's the matter, Daniels? Suspected DUI, the first officer replied. He's acting suspiciously. The older officer stepped closer, seeing the rank-in details on the military identification card Daniels was holding. Lieutenant Colonel Coleman, he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, still holding his stance. Daniels, I think we should. The older cop's words were interrupted by the sound of something falling on the pavement. Marcus glanced over and saw a small bag containing what looked like drugs. Look what we have here, Daniels said triumphantly. Cocaine, I guess. Marcus stared at the bag of drugs, unable to believe what was happening. That's not mine. You put it there. I just saw it fall out of your pocket, Daniels insisted, picking up the bag with his gloved hand. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. Jenkins, Marcus turned to the older cop, he's making this up. Check your dash cam. Jenkins looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Daniels had already pulled out the handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. I'm not doing that until I get a lawyer, Marcus said, his anger finally flaring. This is a clearly staged crime. I won't repeat myself, Daniels said, his face contorted with anger. Daniels, maybe we should call the lieutenant, Jenkins suggested. I'm handling the situation, Daniels snapped back. This is a drug offender. Marcus knew he was in a dangerous situation. No matter what he did, he would be charged with resisting arrest. If he complied, he would be arrested on a trumped-up charge that could ruin his career. I request that your commanding officer be called, or your superiors at the Pentagon, Marcus demanded, his voice calm but firm. This is a violation of my civil rights. What happened next took only a few seconds. Daniels stepped forward, trying to bend Marcus's arms behind his back. Marcus, and the reflexes of a trained soldier, dodged Daniels's grab, but did not fight back. Hold it! Daniels yelled, drawing his gun. Daniels, no! Jenkins yelled. Marcus stood still, his hands raised. I'm unarmed. I'm obeying. But in that tense moment, a car horn sounded in the distance, startling Daniels. And then, gunfire rang out. Part 3, The Aftermath. The bullet struck Marcus in the chest, just below his collarbone. The shock came before the pain. He staggered back, arms still raised, and collapsed to the ground. "No!" Jenkins shouted, rushing to Marcus's side. "Call an ambulance, now!" He ordered Daniels, who stood there, gun still in hand, looking shocked. Jenkins pressed pressure on Marcus's wound. "Lieutenant, hold still. The medic is on his way." Marcus felt a chill spread through him. He had been shot before, in combat, but this was something else. Not in a faraway land, not by a clearly identified enemy, but on his hometown streets, by the people tasked with protecting him. "Camera," he whispered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Dashcam." "Lieutenant, don't talk. Save your strength," Jenkins said, his voice shaking. The sirens of an ambulance rang out in the night. Before he lost consciousness, Marcus saw Daniels standing there, his expression no longer one of arrogance, but of utter terror. News of the shooting spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every news channel was reporting that a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel had been shot during a routine traffic stop. The dashcam and police body camera videos were released after orders from the mayor and the police commissioner, in response to pressure from the public and the Pentagon. What the videos revealed shocked the nation. They showed that Marcus was clearly not aggressive. They showed Daniels dropping a small package and then claiming it belonged to Marcus. And they showed Marcus standing with his hands raised as Daniels opened fire. Within 24 hours, protests erupted across Oak Ridge and spread to cities across the country. But something was different this time. It wasn't just civil rights activists. The U.S. military was involved. In the intensive care unit where Marcus was fighting to survive, dozens of military officers stood guard, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. They came from every branch of the military, from every rank, following an informal order: protect one of their own. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Rebecca Chin called an emergency meeting. "This is not just a racist incident," she told the generals and top civilians. "This is an attack on one of our finest officers, a man who has served this country with valor in multiple conflicts." The president called Marcus's family directly, and the military leadership issued an official statement. This was no longer a matter that could be swept under the rug. Meanwhile, the intelligence community began digging into Daniels' past. What they found sparked further outrage: multiple complaints of excessive force against people of color, 2 previous shootings that had been ruled justified by internal investigations, and social media posts that expressed racist views. But what made this case different from others was the involvement of the Pentagon. The military had powers and resources that civilian organizations did not have, and they were willing to use them to get justice for Marcus. "We are using every legal tool available to ensure that justice is served," Army Chief of Staff General Michael Hayes said at a press conference. Lieutenant Colonel Coleman is a battlefield hero and a gifted leader. This attack was not only directed at him, but also at the core values of the United States Army. 3 days after the shooting, Daniels was arrested and charged with attempted murder, civil rights violations, witness tampering, and a host of other crimes. The case was turned over to the FBI instead of local police, and the Justice Department announced it was launching a broader investigation into the Oak Ridge Police Department's patterns and practices. The investigation quickly expanded. Jenkins, the older officer, agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for leniency. He revealed a culture of systemic racism within the police department, with unofficial policies targeting people of color for stops and searches. "This has been a problem for years," Jenkins testified. "But people are afraid to speak up." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Marcus Coleman slowly recovered. The bullet had punctured his lung and nearly reached his heart, but thanks to prompt medical intervention and sheer willpower, he had survived. When he finally woke up, the first person he saw was his sister Tanya, her eyes red from crying but her face determined. "I told you to be careful," she said, taking his hand. "You should have listened to me," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "There are some people who want to see you," Tanya said, and opened the door. Zoe walked in first, tears welling up in her eyes. Following her was James Jr., who had flown in from college as soon as he heard the news. And behind them was something Marcus hadn't expected, a long line of military officers standing at attention outside his hospital room. "We're behind you, Lieutenant Colonel," a colonel said, stepping in and saluting him. "The entire army is behind you." Part 4, Justice and the System. A few weeks later, Danielle's preliminary hearing took place amid intense public attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, government officials, and a long line of uniformed military officers. Marcus was there, too, sitting in a wheelchair, his wounds still not fully healed. Daniels, pale and gaunt in his orange prison uniform, barely looked up as the charges were read. His attorney tried to argue that the shooting was a tragic accident and that Daniels feared for his safety. But the video evidence was incontrovertible. Federal prosecutors played dashcam and body-worn camera footage, bringing the courtroom to a hush as they watched Marcus stand motionless with his hands raised before he was shot. This was not a mistake, the prosecutor concluded. This is the inevitable consequence of systemic racism and abuse of power. The judge denied bail to Daniels, calling him a danger to the community and a high risk of flight. As Daniels was led away, he finally looked up and met Marcus's eyes. There was no hatred in the lieutenant's eyes, just a silent question, why? In the weeks that followed, the investigation expanded. The FBI seized thousands of emails, text messages, and internal records from the Oak Ridge Police Department. What they found revealed a clear pattern of systemic racism. Black people were stopped 7 times more often than white people, they were frisked 10 times more often, and they were 12 times more likely to experience the use of force. In Washington, congressional hearings were held to examine racial discrimination and law enforcement nationwide. Marcus, still recovering, was called to be the star witness. In his full uniform and decorated uniform, Marcus sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee, his face stern but calm. Colonel Coleman, the chairman of the committee, asked, "Can you share with us what you experienced that night?" Marcus took a deep breath, pained by the wounds that had not yet fully healed. "Chairman, I served this country for 20 years. I fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was wounded in combat twice. I never thought the greatest threat to my life would come from a police officer on the streets of my hometown." The room fell silent as Marcus told his story, not just about the night he was shot, but about his entire life of experiences with racism. "The reason I joined the military was to find a place where I would be judged on my ability and character, not the color of my skin," he said. "And for 20 years, the military gave me that. But every time I took off my uniform, I became a potential threat to too many people." Marcus' testimony sparked a wave of change. Bipartisan efforts began to work together to draft new police reform legislation, including stricter regulations on body cameras, bans on dangerous restraint techniques, and requirements for anti-racism training. At Oak Ridge, change was swift and radical. The police chief resigned. A new civilian oversight board was created. And new policies were put in place to ensure accountability and transparency. Meanwhile, Daniel's trial began. Prosecutors had built an irrefutable case, clear video, testimony from Jenkins and other officers, and data showing Daniel's history of targeting people of color. It took the jury just 3 hours to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. On sentencing day, the courtroom was packed once again. Marcus sat in the front row, his sister and nieces beside him, as well as a parade of military officers. Daniels, now looking older and more desperate, stood before the judge. "Michael Daniels," the judge began, "you violated the sacred trust we place in those who wear the uniform of law enforcement. You betrayed your oath to serve and protect. And you did it out of deep and unjustifiable prejudice." Daniels bowed his head as the judge announced his sentence, 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. As Daniels was led from the courtroom, Marcus felt no joy in this victory. One man had lost his freedom, another had nearly lost his life, and all because of ancient prejudices and a system that failed to address them. Part 5, The Transformation. 6 months after the shooting, Marcus returned to work at the Pentagon. His physical wounds had healed, although he still felt sharp pains when the weather changed or he was too tired. But the psychological scars would last longer. In his new office, Marcus found himself assigned a new assignment, to lead a task force to examine issues of racism and inequality in the military and its relationship with the civilian community. "We need the advantage of someone who has been on both sides," General Hayes said in assigning the task. "Someone who has worn this uniform, but has also lived as a civilian and knows the challenges that people face." Marcus spent hundreds of hours researching, interviewing, and developing recommendations. He read about the military's history of breaking down racial barriers, but also about the continuing hardships faced by soldiers of color. He learned about how police departments across the country have evolved and how some have succeeded in changing their cultures. Exactly 1 year after the shooting, Marcus stood before a large gathering of military commanders and police leaders from across the country. The conference was called Crossing the Line, Building Understanding Between the Military and Law Enforcement. "We all wear uniforms," Marcus began. "We all swear an oath to protect and serve. And yet there are invisible lines that divide us, lines of color, culture, and prejudice." He went on to describe a vision of a future where both the military and the police embody America's highest values: fairness, equality, and respect for all. "My story is not a story of anger," he said. "It should be a story of transformation. Of us, as a nation, learning to see each other as human beings, not as stereotypes." In Oak Ridge, transformation has indeed happened. The police department, under a new chief, has implemented sweeping reforms. They have hired more officers from more diverse communities, introduced new training programs on implicit bias and mediation skills, and implemented unprecedented transparency measures. Most importantly, they have begun to rebuild trust with the community. Officers are patrolling more frequently, participating in community events, and working with local youth groups. For Marcus, this change has represented the best of America, the ability to self-examine, admit mistakes, and grow. But he also knows that this is a long journey, and there is still much work to be done. On a warm spring afternoon, nearly 2 years after the shooting, Marcus drove through the streets of Oak Ridge. This time, he was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple shirt. He parked at a local park, where Tanya was hosting a barbecue for Zoe's 18th birthday. As he stepped out of the car, he noticed a police officer patrolling nearby. There was a tense moment as their eyes locked. But then the officer, a young brown woman, smiled and nodded. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied. It was a small exchange, a fleeting moment of mutual respect. But for Marcus, it represented something larger, the hope that the lines that divided us could, gradually and with conscious effort, be crossed. As he entered the park, Zoe waved to him. "Uncle Marcus. You're here." He smiled and walked away, leaving behind the ghosts of the past and heading towards a future where uniforms, be they military or police, did not define a person, but their actions and character did. Part 6, Changing the System. 3 years after the shooting, Marcus Coleman stood in the Oval Office, watching as the president signed the George Floyd and Marcus Coleman Police Reform Act. The legislation, named after him and another victim of police violence, represents a landmark change in the way law enforcement operates across the country. Today, we take a momentous step toward fulfilling America's promise of justice and equality for all, the president declared, then invited Marcus to speak. Marcus, now a colonel, stepped up to the podium with confidence and humility. "Mr. President, members of Congress, and fellow Americans," he began, "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not alone, but as one of many who have experienced the pain of discrimination. And I stand here with the hope that from that pain, we can build a better future. The bill requires police agencies to conduct training on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques, bans certain dangerous restraint techniques, creates a national database of police misconduct, and provides funding for body-worn camera programs and other reform efforts. But for Marcus, real change must come from within the core of institutions. That's why he founded the Coleman Fund for Justice Reform, using the money from his civil lawsuit against the city of Oak Ridge. The foundation focuses on two main goals: training police officers on racial justice issues and creating pathways for young people from underserved communities into the police and military. We can't change institutions if we don't change the people in them, Marcus often says. His efforts have been rewarded. Time magazine put him on its cover as the bridge builder, and his programs have been replicated in cities across the country. But perhaps the greatest success has been in Oak Ridge. 5 years after the shooting, the city has become a national model for police reform. Arrest rates have dropped, but so has crime. Surveys show that public trust in the police is higher than ever. And most importantly, there have been no more controversial shootings. We've learned that safety and fairness are not mutually exclusive, the new police chief, Nina Washington, explained at a forum Marcus organized. In fact, they depend on each other. When communities trust us, they work with us. And when we respect them, everyone is safer. For Marcus, the scars from his gunshot wound have faded, but the memories remain. He still jumps when he hears a sudden siren and still feels a twinge of anxiety when he sees red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Such wounds never fully heal. But he also found a new meaning in his life. In addition to his work at the Pentagon and his foundation, he married Rebecca, a civil rights attorney he met during his lawsuit, and they were expecting their first child. "We're going to name him James, after my father," he told Tanya at a family dinner. "And I hope the world he grows up in will be a little more just than the one we knew." Tanya took her brother's hand. "You turned your pain into purpose," she said. "That's all we can hope for in this life." After dinner, Marcus drove home, past the area where he had been shot years earlier. The city had erected a small plaque there, a place of reconciliation where tragedy gave way to change. He paused for a moment, looking out at where he had been lying on the pavement, bleeding, thinking he was going to die. But instead of bitterness, he felt a sense of relief. A man had committed a terrible crime and was paying the price. A system had failed and was being fixed. And a man who had nearly lost his life had found a way to turn his pain into purpose. As he drove toward the future, Marcus Coleman knew that the work was not done. Racism, injustice, and division still existed in American society. But he also knew that change was possible, that systems could be reformed, and that even the deepest tragedies could, over time and with conscious effort, lead to something better. And that was a hope worth fighting for. Epilogue: The future. 10 years after the shooting, Marcus Coleman stood before the largest crowd he had ever seen. As the keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony of the new Oak Ridge Police Academy, he looked down at hundreds of young faces, men and women of all races and backgrounds, all wearing new navy blue uniforms. "When I look at you today," he began, "I don't see police officers. I see community defenders. I don't see law enforcers. I see peacemakers." Marcus, now a major general and the Army's vice chief of staff, has come to Oak Ridge every year for this ceremony. For him, it's a sacred commitment, a reminder that from brokenness, something new can grow. "Many of you know my story," he continued. "How I stood on the street not far from here, with my hands raised, and felt a bullet enter my chest. How I almost lost my life because of prejudice and fear." He paused, looking out at the sea of people before him. But that's not the whole story. The real story is about what came after. About how a community came together to make change. About how institutions looked deep inside themselves and asked themselves if they were really living up to the values they proclaimed. And about how, step by step, we began to build a better society. At the front of the row, he saw his sister Tanya and niece Zoe, now a young doctor. Next to them was his wife, Rebecca, holding their 7-year-old son, James. And nearby, dressed in his new uniform, was his nephew, James Jr., who had taken an unexpected path, joining the police force after college. All of them represented Marcus's journey, past, present, and future. "You are entering this profession at a time of transition," he told the graduates. "A time when the definition of protect and serve is being rewritten. You are not just tasked with enforcing the law, you are tasked with building trust, fostering fairness, and ensuring that justice is available to all. He looked toward the police chief and city officials seated at the podium. And to those who lead these officers, I say, remember, culture comes from the top down. What you tolerate, you encourage. What you reward, you will get more of. Marcus ended his speech with a simple message: I stand before you today as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity of our institutions to innovate. Our story, my story, Oak Ridge's story, and now yours, is not a story of perfection. It is the story of progress. Of striving to be better every day. And as you put on that uniform and go out into your communities, remember, every interaction, every decision, every moment is an opportunity to heal old wounds and build a world where all people are truly equal under the law. That is our true legacy. And that is your sacred responsibility. When Marcus finished, the hall rose to applaud. The graduates threw their caps into the air. And Marcus Coleman, a man who has straddled the divide between many worlds, military and civilian, black and white, pain and hope, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the sense that America, for all its challenges, was moving forward. As he stepped off the stage and hugged his family, he knew the work was not done. There were still injustices to fight, prejudices to overcome, and systems to reform. But on that day, in that moment, he allowed himself to feel a rare sense of accomplishment. You did a great job, Zoe said as she hugged her uncle. You learned from the best, Marcus replied, referring to Tanya's resilience and kindness. James Jr., now Officer James Coleman, approached his uncle. In his new uniform, he looked strikingly like his father, who had died in a car accident when James Jr. was young. Uncle, he said, his voice serious, I hope I've made you proud. I know I've chosen a path that many people don't understand. Marcus put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. James, you chose the hardest path, reform from within. That took more courage than anything I've ever done. After graduation, the family gathered at a local restaurant. As they ate and laughed, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way the servers and other diners smiled at James Jr. in his uniform, not with fear or worry, but with genuine respect. What made you decide? Marcus asked his nephew when they had a private moment. After everything that happened to you, why did you choose to be a police officer? James Jr. thought for a moment. When it happened to you, I was in college. I was so angry I wanted to burn down the system. But then I saw what you did, how you turned your anger into action, how you worked to change things instead of just complaining about them. He looked down at his new badge. I realized that the only way to make sure that didn't happen to someone else was to be part of the solution. To be the kind of cop I always hoped I would be when I grew up. Marcus nodded, tears welling in his eyes. My dad would be so proud. So would you, James Jr. said. You showed me that the uniform, whatever it was, wasn't as important as the person inside it. After dinner, Marcus took his wife and son to the park where he had been shot a decade earlier. The city had turned it into a community garden and a space for reflection, with a small plaque describing what had happened and the changes that had been made since. James ran ahead, carefree as only a 7-year-old could be, while Marcus and Rebecca walked slowly behind. Do you have any regrets? Rebecca asked, squeezing her husband's hand. Regret what? Marcus replied. Forgiveness. Moving on. Not letting anger consume you. Marcus looked at his son, who was chasing a butterfly among the flower beds. No, he said finally. Living in anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. You can't build anything lasting out of hate. They sat down on a bench engraved with his name and the words, From Pain to Hope. You know, Marcus admitted, there are days when I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been stopped that night. If I had taken a different path. Would things have been different? Or would it have been just a different person, a different place, a different tragedy? Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't think we'll ever know. But what we do know is that you took a terrible moment and turned it into a movement. You changed everything. It wasn't just you, he corrected. We did it. All of us. They sat in silence, watching James play. After a while, a patrol officer walked by, a young black woman with a friendly smile. "Good evening, General Coleman," she greeted, nodding her head in respect. "Thank you for your speech today. It means a lot to a lot of us." "Thank you for your service, officer," Marcus replied. When she left, James ran to his parents. "The butterfly flew away," he announced. "They do that sometimes," Marcus said, picking his son up. "But the great thing about butterflies is that they always come back in the spring." As they walked home through the park, Marcus thought about the long journey he had taken, from young man afraid of the police, to soldier fighting for his country, to victim of discrimination, and finally to catalyst for change. It wasn't the path he had chosen, but it was the one that had brought him to where he needed to be. "Dad," James asked, his voice sleepy as he placed him in the car, "is it hard to be a police officer?" Marcus looked at his son, wondering what kind of world he would inherit. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But the most important things are often the hardest." "Like being a soldier?" the boy asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "And like being a father, or a good friend, or anything worthwhile. It takes courage to do the right thing, especially when it's not easy." As they drove through town toward home, Marcus noticed that he no longer felt nervous when he saw a patrol car in his rearview mirror. The scars were still there, both inside and out, but they no longer defined him. At the last stop before home, Marcus saw a large billboard for the Oak Ridge Police Academy. It featured pictures of diverse officers and the words, "Serve with compassion, lead with integrity." When the light turned green, Marcus drove toward the house his family had bought in Oak Ridge, the city he had once wanted to leave, but had now chosen to raise his son. He had come home in a way he never expected, but in the end, it was exactly where he needed to be. In the years to come, the fight for justice and equality would continue. There would be many challenges, many setbacks, and perhaps even more tragedy. But Marcus Coleman, who stood on the line between two worlds and lived to tell the tale, will continue to work toward a day when those lines no longer divide us. And maybe, just maybe, his son will live in a world where a person's worth is judged not by the color of their skin or the uniform they wear, but by the content of their character and the courage of their heart. That would be a legacy worthy of all the pain and struggle, and America that truly lives up to its promise of liberty and justice for all. The end.